So, you have your world. Maybe there's a religion in there, and maybe you know how your world was created, but today let's give you something you can actually use in your first session. Let's start building you a city. Hey fellow Game Masters, I'm Richard Quiner. Welcome back to the Daily D20, your daily dose of all things tabletop role-playing games, helping you build your world and master your game. And today, like I said, we're going to start building a city. There's a lot of ways you can begin building a city, but I like to start with 3 simple questions that give you a nice foundation for the future of your world. As we go over these questions and you start thinking about your city, I want you to leave a comment in the comment section below. Let me know what you've been building and tell me more about your new city that you're making. Now, I know we could start with maps. We could start with building some NPCs and filling out our city, and those are cool and fun, and we're gonna do that. But I like to start with these 3 questions because it gives the city a lot of life and a really good foundation for moving forward, even though they might not be the most exciting questions to answer for your tabletop role-playing game. The first question on my list I want you to answer is, where is your city and why? Now, in the real world, cities are all over the place, but almost every city has a reason that it was formed. There's something that made someone, as they were walking along, they stopped and said, you know what, I'm gonna live here. So what caused the characters in your fantasy world to stop at the location of your city and put down some roots? A lot of options you could have. This could be a landmark, like a large mountain or a coastline, or some area like a protected coastline could have a bay where you could get a lot of ships in and out safely. You could have resources. California and Alaska are both known to have had a gold rush where people came from all over to mine gold and strike it rich. So that's the first question you need to ask and answer about your city, is where is it and why? For me, in Yindir, I have mentioned that there is a town called East Anchor. And for this town of East Anchor, the reason it exists, why people put down roots, is because at the heart of it, it is a huge landmark. There's a gigantic chain that's just kind of anchored into the middle of the town, that the town built up from around that anchor. In addition to that, it's also a good spot on a coastline, so transportation of goods and materials would be pretty easy to get from anywhere else to just ship them straight into East Anchor, even though it's not a very large town. Question number 2 for your fantasy city is, how does your city make some money? What is its economy built around? When I'm thinking of economies, I like to think of cities as kind of a family. Where does the family's money come from? Some sort of industry, something that everyone in the family works on. Think of it that way, and it's pretty easy to come up with some economy or some industry that defines your city. I also like to think of an industry of a city as something that 60 to 80% of the people in the town are participating in, and the rest are there kind of to support that main industry. So if you think about it that way, you can kind of narrow it down to a couple cool industries that your town could be good at. Also, you don't have to pick just one. You can have a town that has multiple major exports or major industries all in one. And on top of that, it's okay to answer this in a very simple way. You don't need to get super complicated and super in-depth right now about how your economy works. If you think of just some sort of base resource or base type of economy, then later on you can fill in the blanks and give more details of how this economy will work. So for my example of East Anchor in Yindir, I have 3 main economies. One is fishing. It's a coastal town. I take this kind of from my own childhood. I grew up in a small town in Alaska on the coast that's main industry was fishing, both commercial and sport. And I kind of like the idea of that. I like that you can have this main industry in a town without the town having to be huge. And that just kind of works for me. So I'm putting a little bit of my own personal history into my new world, with the town of East Anchor being a fishing town. On top of that, another small part of my childhood was growing up in Oregon a little bit and being near the forestry industry. So for me in East Anchor, I'm going to have it surrounded by a rather large forest that has been sustainably harvested over the century or so that people have been there. And so its second industry is going to be lumber, which it can of course use the ocean and the boats traveling around to ship lumber wherever it needs to go. And the last economy, industry, whatever you want to call it, that I put in East Anchor is a gold rush of sort. It's not for an expensive material that is found nearby the town, but it is for the fact that the chain that is in the middle of town leads up to another floating city high above that has untold riches that many adventurers have come into the town to try and get into the floating city in order to bring those riches back. It's attracted a lot of investors and a lot of wealthy people into the town of East Anchor in order to capitalize on that riches promised from up above. So, I don't know, maybe that gave you some ideas for your city in terms of industry and economy that you might have. Maybe not. There are plenty of other ways people can make money in your fantasy world. You could go with mining, you could go with horses and cattle, you could go with farming. There's a lot of different ways for your city to make some money. And the last question I want you to think about when building your new town is who lives there? And when you're answering this question of who lives in your town, I want you to think on both a cultural side and an economical side, and meaning who has the money. From the cultural side, you should think of it as what is the racial divide in your town. And I'm not talking about are the races divided, but I'm saying more like the makeup of your town. I live in Los Angeles. This is a big melting pot of a lot of different cultures. A lot of different races all live here. The same could happen in your town. You could also have a town that has one main race. You could have an elven city where it's very rare to see an outsider of a human or a dwarf. You could have a town that's all gnomes and halflings if you want. What type of people live in your town from a cultural standpoint? From an economic side, I want to know how is the money divided up among the citizens of your town? Is there a big disparity between the wealthy and the poor? Is it kind of a utopia where everyone has the same amount of money? Is it somewhere in between? What is the economic makeup of your town? And you could look at the economic makeup as kind of a caste system. In history, a lot of cultures had caste systems where the wealthy would be a higher class and the poor would be a much lower class or a less wanted type of people. That's just how things were in some areas, and you could incorporate that into your own world by having a caste system of the very wealthy, the merchants, or the old money you might call it, versus the poor people who live on the streets, the working class citizens of your community. So that is the other side of who lives there that I want you to think about. So you have both the racial, cultural side of it and the money divide, so to speak, of your town. I know this might not seem like a big deal right now. Answering these three questions is kind of weird, but when you think about the cultural side of your town, it can help you inform a lot of other choices later on. So for example, if you have a town that is mostly elves, and it's very rare to see someone from another race in that town, you may decide that you want to have an NPC that is an outsider, that the players can relate to and communicate with from an outsider's perspective. And then you already know right there that that NPC cannot be an elf because they need to be something very different. So in the end, you could end up with a dwarf tavern owner in an elven city, and you have this outsider that just stands out, but they somehow found a way into the town and found the respect of the people. So it gives you a nice base that you can use to build up the rest of your city and give everyone who is in your city a reason to be there. Because now you've discovered an economy that they're using, you've discovered what kind of people they are, and you've discovered why they would even be in that town to begin with. Going back to the cultural and monetary divide of a town, for my city of East Anchor, it is a melting pot currently because all the adventurers are showing up trying to get the riches from the city of above. But originally, it was a dwarven colony. I had this idea that it was going to be a penal colony. All the prisoners were shipped to this island and they formed their own society there, and they were going to be largely dwarves, so East Anchor was going to be a dwarven colony that is now a big melting pot of adventurers. In terms of the wealth in East Anchor, because of the history of the island and the fact that it was a criminal penal colony, I'm having it so there's not a lot of old money. It's anything that's earned in East Anchor has been something that people have worked for in terms of building up a lumber business or building up possibly a fishing business, something like that. So there's no one that is extremely wealthy because of something their parents did. It's all earned and worked for, essentially, in my town of East Anchor. So, like I said, let me know what you decided about your town in the comments below. And like I said, answer those three questions. Give yourself a good foundation to build your new town on, and let me know what that is. If you need some help coming up with world religions and want to know a couple belief systems that are existent in the real world, go ahead and click at this video over here. And if you want to know more about creation stories or kind of the fantastical elements of world building, you can click this one over here. And of course, if you liked the video, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button for more just like this one. Thanks for watching.